Coherence Podcast invites you to get up close and personal with creatives who have figured out how to make a living doing the thing that they love most, and to build custom careers that truly fit their sensibilities. Traditional linear careers are a thing of the past, and it's time that we accept that work today is fluid. It's full of ambiguity, there are more options, and therefore more potential for overwhelm. I'm here to guide you through the wild world of working for yourself so you can cut out the noise, center your own judgment, and live a life that makes amazing sense for you. I'm Melissa Wong, your host of Coherence Podcast. I started my career zigzagging from job to job, afraid that I would never find my thing. I was a late career bloomer with a list of jobs that felt too scattered or not impressive enough. Fast forward to today, after finding a true vocation as a coach for creative independence, and I get to show up every day to a business that I love. I believe everyone can create a job that suits them, whether that's building your own business or weaving together a patchwork of different jobs. It doesn't have to be a traditional 9-to-5. It just has to make you feel aligned and alive and generate a livelihood that lets you live life according to your own values and sensibilities. If you want to learn what makes sense for you, listen in and make sense with us. I want to share my own career story with you because I think it'll help you understand where I'm coming from and give some context for why this particular podcast feels especially meaningful to me. And not just this podcast, but really my entire business, Coherent Studio. I think a lot of coaches and therapists tend to work with people that exemplify them in their former states. In other words, we gravitate to help people with things that we've had trouble with in the past. So it's almost like we've learned what it took to heal or evolve out of a former state of pain, and we want to help other people through it with the knowledge that we have now. And so it shouldn't surprise me that I wanted to work with people and their career fit, because this was a decade or more of my life where I felt really vexed. I didn't know what it was that was going to give me that satisfying click. And I felt like I knew that it was possible, but it just escaped me. And that felt full of angst at times. It wasn't all a super painful process, but it came with a lot of not always feeling as confident about my work and not feeling proud of it and not feeling like I wanted to talk about it. And I think work is such a big part of people's identity, or at least it can be. And I hope that the work that I do with my clients can help them feel excited and proud, and a very coaching word, but resonant. It like reverberates in your being, in your chest. It makes you excited when you do it. And that is not a given, and it's not something that most people find right away, right? It is a journey, and so there is a career path. And today I want to tell you about my career path so you can understand where I'm coming from and maybe see a bit of yourself in my story. I want to bring you to the office of the career counselor. This was senior year, my last year at UC Berkeley as an undergraduate. And this man, he handed me a tissue box telling me that I shouldn't worry, that this was very common. A lot of students sat across from him and cried because I was needing a tissue. I was upset. He had pushed me, what I felt was pushing me, by continually questioning me in our first and only session. Like, what is it that I wanted, right? He was so confident that there was something I truly knew I wanted to do, but that I was afraid of going for. And the truth was that I didn't have that thing. I didn't have a plan. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do after college graduation, and that was just a few months away. I felt confused. Like this whole time, so much of my upbringing was about preparing to go to college. Everything was about college. And I made it there. I went to college. I went to what I felt like was a good college. And this driving focus around school and getting a major, No one was there to really spell it out for me about how all this school was supposed to apply to what was next. I hadn't really spent that much time thinking about a career. I had been just enjoying learning, and it dawned on me a few months away from graduation that I had to figure this out. So up until that point where I realized that I had to go off into this quote unquote real world, my future had felt really bright and kind of hazy and full of promise. But now as I was sitting there in the career counselor's office and trying to, pretend I wasn't crying and blowing my nose, it really didn't feel that way. In the moment where the career counselor leaned in and was just like, "What do you really want, Melissa?" I know he was well-meaning, but it really pierced me. It felt like he had found this soft spot of mine and dug his little prying finger into the center of it. I didn't know what I really wanted, and if I did, why would I be in his office? I think his questioning made me feel worse and made it seem like everyone else actually did know what they want, and they were just too timid to claim it. So I didn't leave his office feeling very clear or comforted. I think I just felt lost and kind of foolish. In the end, I would end up going off to teach English in Spain after I graduated. It's a step that I think many people do when they don't really know what they want to do yet, but they're just looking for more adventure, and that was where I was at. I wanted to see more of the world, and I didn't know what would come after that. So I want to backtrack for a minute and just share about my childhood a little bit. Like, I always had a hard time setting my sights on one thing. When I was little, people asked me what I wanted to do or be when I grew up. And I said, I want to be a gymnast. I want to be a veterinarian. I want to be a teacher. I wanted to bag groceries on the weekend. I just, I wasn't like your one answer child. And even though none of those intentions really had longevity, I think what did was this feeling of like, I want to do lots of things. Don't just ask me to do one thing. I think this really resurfaced when I was a senior in high school and you're applying for college applications. And I started to realize that the world wanted me to be really good at something. That was why people got scholarships. That was why people got into great universities. That was what made people successful. And I saw that reiterated on all of these college entrance essays saying, what are you passionate about? What are you super good at? And I felt annoyed and again, kind of misled. Like, I have been groomed to be this well-rounded person in order to get into university. And now you're telling me that I need to be a standout. So that's kind of when this narrative started. One of my friends jokingly called me Mordinary, which was ordinary plus Melissa, I guess, Mordinary, because I guess maybe I had a little bit of Eeyore type moments where I was like, woe is me, like there's nothing I'm really good at, I'm just ordinary. After I got to college, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I had created my own major because Berkeley lets you do that. That's an option called Interdisciplinary Studies Field Major. And that basically enabled you to take classes across lots of different majors and not have to necessarily follow the track. The catch was that you had to write a thesis, and I ended up writing mine about human connection and technology and how different technology platforms are adopting or co-opting community. It's something I was interested in, just how we connect. And as I noticed more of my peers on Facebook and YouTube, heads down on campus with their ear pods, I just kind of sensed like, okay, something's really shifting about the way that we're relating to each other. But I didn't really think I was going to do anything with that thesis. It just was like a way to choose a non-choice kind of major. All throughout college, I worked in hospitality. I worked in restaurants. I was a hostess. I was in a catering company. And that was an extension of my first job that I got through my dad, because my dad owned a small business. He owned a restaurant, a seafood restaurant in San Diego. And despite my best judgment, I asked him if I could have a job there to save up money for gas. And I think that continued into college. I was working not to gain experience for a career, but to really save up money to go experience life. I wanted to travel and I wanted to see the world. So again, fast forward to the end of college, and I felt like I didn't really have any like work experience to put on a resume. So I ended up applying for this job teaching English in Spain, where you really only needed to have a bachelor's degree to get accepted. I didn't even speak Spanish. And the role only required me to do 12 hours a week of work. I was really essentially a puppet in the classrooms. I didn't really have to produce my own lesson plans. I would just sort of be there to speak English. And I quickly learned that this role was just a way for the school to get a little bit more funding for being bilingual. I don't know, it felt like a sham. I felt ostracized at the school and pretty lonely in the city I was living in. I felt antsy to get back to the Bay Area where a lot of my college friends had landed and to get a real job. When I got back, my best friend, who had been working with different food-related projects, ended up doing what I knew already, which was working in hospitality, but sort of more on the kind of food management side of things. I ended up getting a job at a hip cocktail bar, and I was also assisting a caterer who produced amazing Japanese meals for rich people. And I also did some ad sales working for a print publication. So I was working in food across, different, I guess, supporting different independent players in the food world in the Bay Area and really just getting my bearings. I was 23 and I felt really starry-eyed about the kinds of people that I was meeting, even though I wasn't really sure where this was all going to go. And I definitely wasn't making that much money. I eventually was offered a $13 an hour operations assistant position, working for a chef owner of a really impressive pastry company. It still exists today. They have their own storefront in San Francisco. And I decided to scrap all of my other 3 jobs for this kind of essentially full-time position. I was dating a chef who felt like a big deal in the restaurant industry, and I think because he was so connected and known in this world, and I just felt like a little nobody, a little lost without my own sense of direction or self-worth. I really wanted to spend every waking moment that I wasn't working with him. I feel like I was kind of glomming onto him for, I don't know, purpose or validation, definitely excitement. I also felt like the restaurant community really felt like a community. In terms of everywhere we go, people kind of knew him and then me, and I felt like I was a part of something bigger again, which is something that I really loved about university and especially living in the student cooperative system there. So my chef boyfriend was very enterprising, and I loved talking to him about his business ideas and maybe what new restaurant he should start. And I was always talking through his plans with him and encouraging him, and all the while I felt like I was sort of living in his shadow, not really knowing what my worth was. I ended up moving out of San Francisco and quitting my operations assistant job to go live with him north of the city. And he was going to be working for a rich billionaire, cooking food for him. And I was just going to kind of hang out. And I made very little money assisting him, quote unquote, assisting him, which kind of looked like picking produce in the farm and making jam and just little things to make me happy, which would make him happy and not lonely for being there. I was going to start writing a screenplay. I still have it on my computer somewhere. It was all going to be about the restaurant industry. And I don't know if my hopes were really to write something that would turn into a big deal, or if I just kind of was trying to process my experiences of the restaurant industry. I was 25, and after a low moment of realizing that I was not really living a life that felt like my own, I returned to the Bay Area. I got out of that relationship, and I managed to get a job working for SoundCloud. I say the word managed very intentionally because at the time it did feel like a surprise. I had built so much of my work in the hospitality industry, and I felt amazed that without a personal connection at SoundCloud that I was hired. The title was Community Support Specialist, and so that also was kind of a nice surprise that what I ended up writing my thesis about in college came back around, that word community as the buzzword, and saying, okay, if I wrote a whole thesis about what it means to be a part of a community, then surely I can do a community support specialist job, which I think was essentially a nicer way of saying you're going to be a customer support person. But I made way into that role. It was really a fun place to work, the good people. I was playing ping pong. I was, participating in all the fun little things that startups promise, right? Like a cookie competition or different like learning opportunities. And I think that job was really just a job. I wasn't sure what upward mobility really looked like. I got to clock out around 6 and didn't really stay any later than I had to. And I started to grow weary of answering support tickets. Then the call for another adventure arrived, and I ended up moving to Massachusetts for a relationship, another relationship, and I was going to be working remotely for SoundCloud. So even though the work was great, I think I did center the opportunity to see where this relationship was going to go. And even though I framed it that I would return in 6 months, I think I knew that I wouldn't really be returning that soon. I was starting to feel disconnected from the team that I worked with. And when all that was left of the job itself was just answering support tickets, I put in my notice after feeling like there was nowhere really left for me to go. I wanted to move away from a tech-heavy job and more toward in-person communities because I was working in my boyfriend at the time's restaurant, and I got to feel that difference of what it feels like to be in the energy of the restaurant, of knowing people and that in-person community. Fast forward, the relationship ended. It did not pan out, and I was not ready to move back to the West Coast. So I ended up moving to New York, where my bestie had moved, and I got a job working for little money, being assistant to the manager of a recreational cooking school. And this was particularly exciting for me because I had suddenly started putting it together that I wanted to own a space of my own. I didn't want it to be just a restaurant, but I wanted it to be a place of learning, of connection. I wanted it to be some sort of hybrid space that I'd seen in some of my travels. And this recreational cooking school and event space seemed like it could be kind of similar to what I was looking to start. But when I got there, everyone seemed overworked and it felt kind of like elitist. And amidst all the beauty of the space itself, I just felt the sort of cattiness of the people that worked there. And I kind of swung back toward what I knew, which was to work at a cool tech company. And in New York, there were fewer options than the Bay Area. I thought of Kickstarter because I knew someone who worked there. And it seemed like one of the more well-known names in of the tech companies in New York. I also liked the fact that they had decentralized power with their model by giving people a tool to fund their projects. And I think because so many tech companies were venture-backed in the Bay Area, it also stood out to me that Kickstarter had not really gone that route. They own their own building. They had a profitable business model from the get-go, and that seemed appealing. So I landed a community support role there. I was hired back into a small team of nice people. And after a little bit of an adjustment period at the beginning, I ended up really liking it there. I had friends. I moved up in the sense that I was promoted to be a manager of some of the support team. I got a special interim role helping with the translation project. And essentially, what you need to know is that I got a bump up. I got a glimpse of what it would be like to move forward in the company. And it kind of didn't feel that great. I remember the day that we had this big success, the translation team. We'd all been working really hard to get Kickstarter available in different languages. So I'd been working with German speakers, English speakers, Spanish speakers to do all this translation work. And the day that we pushed the, on button and all the sites were launched, I think we did like a little cheers in the kitchen, and then that was it. And I think throughout the day we saw some projects kind of roll onto the platform, but I felt like a little disenchanted. Like what was all that for? Where's the energy? Where's the feeling of the impact? And I think that was a really telling moment for me that I wasn't going to get that like embodied satisfaction while working at a tech company. And it was just too diffuse. I wanted to be more connected to my impact. I quit and I didn't really know what was next. I just knew that this theme of wanting to connect people IRL had resurfaced again. And as I started kind of putting the pieces together in my own life, I realized that I've had this thing about supporting women and figuring out how they can sort out transitional moments like myself. So I ended up prototyping a small organization, if you could call it that, but really like a little program. I had different cohorts of women who got together for goal setting, accountability, and asking personal questions to get them moving in a direction. Does that sound familiar? I tested this out in my living room, in Kickstarter's office, and all the while I was doing a yoga teacher training, as one does when they don't totally know what they want to do next. I felt like I really needed to hone my facilitation skills, so I took some facilitation trainings. I bought books. It was a period of exploration and learning. And I ended up meeting my future business partner, at one of the small gatherings of women who hosted events for women. I was going to a lot of events at the time and was trying to find inspiration, or maybe even a business partner who could help me really manifest a community space idea. And Sandy was that person. So I just felt like I liked Sandy's energy right from the get-go. And after we grabbed a coffee and I heard that they wanted to create their own space, I was like, wow, that sounds like something I want to do. And we felt like, okay, there's enough overlap here. Like, what if we did a 1-month pop-up? I think I floated the idea. And I was really surprised when Sandy said yes. I kind of felt like a little, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, but a little low self-esteem, perhaps. I didn't really know what Sandy saw in me, and we didn't know each other super well. So I felt like maybe I hadn't given them enough reasons to embark on something like a whole 1-month pop-up. But yeah, they must have trusted me and been looking for some motivation and partnership to take their idea to the next level. And so we began working together. And what we would end up going on to create is called New Women's Space. It still arguably exists today. I think they just moved out of the physical space. But, fast forward 7 years later, and this thing that was supposed to be a 1-month pop-up had a lot more longevity than I think we could have expected. And now Sandy and I didn't end up shepherding the project for all of those 7 years. I was there only for about 2, and Sandy was there for a little bit longer before we passed the baton to other people. But what I love about our beginnings is that it really started as an experiment and as a prototype, and we just couldn't have seen the future of how big it would be for us. And I think one thing that we did early that clued us into that it should be something longer than a month is that we did these feedback sessions, and we asked these groups of friends mostly, like what they'd want to see in a space for women and non-binary folks. And there was something about really building relationships. And so we thought, what if we were just going to put together this 1-month pop-up, and then all this work has been done to kind of get it up and running, and then we just have to tear it down. That's probably going to feel not great. And so we found a space that let us be on a month-to-month lease, and it really worked for us because we weren't sure about the financials of everything, but we did know that we wanted the option to continue. So fast forward 1.5 years in, and I felt really proud of the project, but not really sure of the business side. And by business side, I guess I mean the money side. I was not saving any money. I was in my early 30s, and in part because we had accessibility in mind so much when we designed every one of our services and programs, that meant that we were not like an elite high earning service. We offered sliding scale, we offered work trades, we were not venture backed. We were really just 2 people with overlapping dreams. So ultimately, I decided to go back to California, where I'm from, to put down roots closer to my family. As much as I felt proud and loved what we'd built at New Women's Space, I didn't see a viable future for me there. And it was not just about New Women's Space, but it was really about the city itself. I felt like a lot of friends that I knew from my time in the West Coast were moving from New York back west. And I was feeling really sad about that. Like suddenly I felt like all these friends I had were suddenly gone. I was also fresh off of a painful breakup, and that made moving across the country feel even more enticing. But it was really tough. I love New York. It's a place that still feels like the city that got away. Like, I speak about it in kind of like romantic terms because it just holds so much vibrancy, diversity, stimulation, and adventure. But it felt time for me to embrace a different set of values. However intentional or not, I was moving back to California with this desire to find work and a relationship that I could really commit to and build from. So fast forward, I shipped all of my stuff on an Amtrak that arrived at my aunt's apartment where she let me stay for a couple months. And I was just getting my footing back in this place that I knew, the Bay Area, but that had changed since I'd been there. After a few months, I ended up meeting my partner again, or reconnecting with my partner, who is now my husband. We had been actually next door neighbors at the co-op that we lived in. And while we had known of each other in college, we weren't really friends. We didn't spend a lot of time with each other. But he had seen me post on Facebook that I was back and moving to this part of Oakland, and he reached out. And, while we don't live in California, my whole idea of like putting down roots in California, we ended up moving to Portland, Oregon in 2023 after we got married, and were thinking about having kids and trying to have a house that could, create a nice lifestyle for a family. I did end up finding what I was looking for, which is this home base to invest in. And as far as the work side of things, I had a couple last hurrahs of career pivoting. I had done a 12-week UX design boot camp and was really thinking that the service design side of user experience design could fit me. And I also tried some traditional employment. So after the boot camp, I worked for a small architecture firm, kind of designing big events for them. I then missed working for a bigger organization, so I spent a year working for Nextdoor's community team, trying to plug back into something bigger, and the pandemic hit. So I was part of the first onboarding group that had to transition from in-person onboarding to virtual. And one of the main reasons that Nextdoor felt really compelling was because I was going to get to work in an office again, and that really got shut down by the pandemic. So I only worked there a year, and in the middle of that, I ended up finding coaching. In some ways, thinking about like an on and off again relationship, or this thing that you keep trying and wondering if it's going to work. Like, I think that was me in therapy or business school. It felt like every 3 years, I would reopen the same document and just add to it of different higher education programs, like master's degrees that I could check out. And I would go on tours and I would talk to people and I would think, maybe I could become a therapist, or maybe something about business school would suit me. But it never felt like a strong enough yes. And I don't know if it was something about the pandemic, something about feeling like the community work was too diffuse. It was just not really it. There was a pivotal conversation I had with my partner who was really reflecting back to me that I shine in smaller groups or one-on-ones. And that made me think about therapy again and coaching. And as I explored different therapy programs, I realized that I was not excited about any of them. There was too much time and money in exchange for not enough clarity. I wasn't sure what population I wanted to serve. I would often joke that I only wanted to work with people with a quote unquote normal amount of dysfunction. And, even though I joke about that, it's kind of true. I knew that I wanted to help people work through anxiety and moments of sadness, maybe low self-esteem. But I didn't want to be holding the well of their healing. I think I wanted that to be left to the therapist, and I wanted to feel very invited and given explicit permission to ask people to think about action and what change they could implement in their life. And so it all came together for me under coaching. I felt like coaching fit my desire to go deep with people, to have permission to kind of weave together like the insights that can come from like a intellectual side of things, the heart space that comes with like holding the emotion of it, and then the action piece. And all of this coincided with the fact that coaching was more established. It was more reputed than it had been in the past. I feel like it was trusted more by the mainstream. It paid well, and the timing was just really like coming together. So in a way, coaching helped me break this pattern of jumping from one thing to another. And around the same time, I got married, and I also stopped that pattern of jumping around from one thing to another. And so this part of me that was always worried that I couldn't commit to something, or that I was, unfocused or like undisciplined in some ways, that narrative got really busted. And at the same time, while I have been a coach for the past 4 or 5 years, I can see little evolutions within my coaching business. It's not that I stopped being a coach and pivoted outside of coaching. It's just that I made small changes within it. So it looks a little bit more continuous, even though it has enough space for change. I think that my career is a great example of a career path archetype that I'm calling the Mosaic maker. And the Mosaic maker's career looks scattered or random for many years until suddenly there's like this unifying theme that emerges, and it all makes really good sense in retrospect. It can feel like a chaotic path when you're actually living it, but it's actually quite cohesive when you look back. So maybe someone worked as a teacher, and then they worked in tech support, and then they were a project manager, and finally realized that their, true calling is instructional design, where they can kind of fit together all those seemingly disparate experiences and create something unique. And I think, if I look at my experience that I've just walked you through, it's like I started in hospitality. I did community support. I created a space. I facilitated. All of that can come together for me under my coaching practice. And I couldn't really see those connections at first, but they ended up combining to create something that feels very, fitting and custom to me. So I know that's not a given. I feel really lucky that they did come together, and I was able to find work that I feel like I could do the rest of my life. I'm still relatively young, so I don't know how things will unfold. But I do think what's been so healing for me in a way is that it's really challenged this narrative that I was lost, or I had not arrived. And it's a common career limiting belief that I see so many people entertain, which is like, something's wrong with me. I'm late. I'm behind. I'm never going to make it. I think this kind of career path is really challenging because you don't really have the comfort of knowing that it's all going to come together until it actually does. So if you are identifying with any part of my story, the hopping part, the pendulum swinging, the seeking, but you haven't found your thing yet, I hope you can keep experimenting and finding moments of introspection to really tune into what's feeling good, and to trust that the only way to find that satisfying fit is to keep trying. You have to keep trying. You have to keep doing different things, seeing how the connections are going to come together, but you need to stay engaged and proactive. And for those of you that don't really feel like you are like me or that Mosaic maker archetype, I would invite you to take my quiz that's on my website. It's called What's Your Career Path Archetype? And it can help you get clear on what your particular path is or could be. But I think before I wrap this up, I want to go back to the story about me in the career counselor's office. So now, as a coach who works with clients who are trying to make moves, I can see now what that college career counselor was talking about. Many of the people that I work with actually do harbor this like special sacred dream. And when they can share it with me, we can look at it together, we hold it, we poke at it, we practice threatening it, trying on what it could feel like to just get rid of it altogether. And then we keep seeing if we want to pull it back, if we want to keep holding that dream. And I think our conversations help illuminate the path that they want to move forward with. So on the best days, the client steps closer to their dream and honors it by not letting it only exist, but expand. Some clients are more like me, back in that career counselor's office and really despairing over not knowing what to do. When a clear path feels hazy and obscured, we need to start back at the basics. We look at past moments of both, high highs and low lows, the elation and the hardship, and we start to look at patterns. We begin to create a collection of stories that we can play with. We decide which ones to keep for their foundation of their personal narrative, the ones that they want to keep telling. And once they have that foundation and there is something sturdy enough for them to leap on, we start sticking ideas up on the wall. We step back, react to them, we notice what urges come up, and we're in experimentation mode. And soon enough, that hazy state that client is in starts to get clearer. The beginning of a path emerges from the darkness of it all, and a heart's desire is known. And there's even enough clarity to confidently take a step. So my hope is that when I greet a client who is like me and really feels hazy on what's next and doesn't even know what they want or what's up and down, that I don't make them feel like there's anything wrong with them, because there's not, and that they have a partner and a guide to step alongside them to kind of make meaning and create coherence for them so that they can find their path forward and try not to despair in the process, maybe even enjoy it. So I think for me, after a long relationship with the specter of this passion myth, the one that insists that everyone has a passion and we just need to find it, I have a more grounded perspective now. I think there's so many different ways that people relate to their dreams, and some people have a hidden dream and some obstacle prevents them from ever realizing it, and others will overcome obstacles and greet their dream only to realize it's wonderful, but it's not perfect. That's life. It's just, it doesn't always get tied up neatly in a bow like that. Some people will continue searching for their hidden dream, insisting that it exists, that they're just not looking hard enough, and maybe they'll return back to themselves, emerging from their search with this wisdom that their occupation is good enough as long as they're good with themselves. As a coach, I help sort out what people's relationships are to their visions, and we can also produce new visions in the process. There's no cookie cutter roadmap. I know that plans feel comforting because they signal that there is direction and order. Direction and order signal that there's some sort of guiding reason, that there's meaning. And as we work to create a plan, while also building acceptance that the plan can change and that's okay, you start to realize that you have all the tools and resources inside of you to construct the pathways that are going to take you where you want to go. So thanks for following me on this thorough journey of my career. And I'm hoping that you take away that everyone's unique path is different. You can often find meaning and significance in hindsight. You just got to keep trying and pressing on. And you don't have to do it alone. There are a lot of tools, resources, and coaches out there that can help you find your own way.